I Barely Got Here is a collection of stories and conversations based on 24 years in law enforcement. You have the right to be disturbed by some of the content or disagree with the viewpoints. Anything you hear can and will be dosed with sarcasm and dark humor. You have the right to know that discussions will often be graphic with language and themes that are intended for a mature audience. Do you understand your rights? Then buckle up, Buttercup. We're going 10-8. Hello and welcome back to I Barely Got Here. I'm your host, Kevin Booncher, and I'm happy to bring back a good friend of mine, John. He's done a couple episodes with me by now. John, if you want to say hey.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
So how are things going for you?
You know, life's pretty good. As you know, I'm in real estate, and we've been really busy. We've got a severe supply and demand shortage right now. Lots of demand and not much supply, so if you're thinking about buying or selling a home, actually, now's a great time to do it. So
yeah, and I know the Phoenix market is huge hot. So, well, before we move forward, what's a contact? How to contact you?
My phone number is 480-458-7399, or you can find me at eastvalleyproperties.net.
There you go. So there's a real estate hookup for you. And be primarily east side-ish, central Phoenix?
Yeah, we go where the business takes us, but I predominantly work in the Southeast Valley.
Cool.
Queen Creek, Chandler, Gilbert.
Perfect. Way far from me.
Way far from you.
Which, again, thank you for coming. I know it's a long drive for you. So, hey, we're going to get into this. It's a good story. It's another homicide case. Because, again, John is a retired homicide investigator. Did a lot of homicides, a lot of murder investigations, major case investigations. So, without further ado, tonight's episode is The Hips Don't Lie. John, I'm just going to let you start this thing off, and then I will ask my questions and ask for clarification when I need it.
Sounds great. First, I want to thank Jay for letting me guest host for him today and letting me sit in his chair while we do this. So, yeah, so The Hips Don't Lie. This is an interesting story. It's about 20 years ago now, so the memory may not always be as good as it once was, but we'll go from there. So Chandler police had arrested a guy. His name was Brian. They arrested him on some property crimes, burglaries and thefts and that kind of stuff. And while they were interviewing him one evening at their police station, just as we had talked in a previous episode, there's no honor among thieves. It's every man for himself. Well, Brian threw out to the Chandler detectives that he had some information on a homicide that had happened in Tempe about 3 weeks earlier.
And so he's doing this because?
Well, he wants to save his own bacon because he's looking at burglary and theft charges right now. So he thinks if he throws a bigger fish to the detectives, that will help him in his case. So he tells them that there was a murder that happened in Tempe, kind of gives a generic idea of where it might have happened and about 3 weeks previous, and that the body was dumped in Mesa near Country Club and the river bottom. And whatever story he told them was intriguing enough to the Chandler detectives that they actually reached out to Tempe, and a couple of our night detectives, because this was in the evening, went to Chandler and contacted Brian themselves. Brian told our detectives that he's kind of got this circle of friends that he runs with, and they're really more of a little circle of drug dealers and meth users and car thieves. The key players were Tony, who's kind of the leader of the group, Bubba, who's the enforcer, and Tim, in this case, who turned out to be the victim. Brian kind of, in vague terms, told our detectives that Tim was maybe going to be snitching. He had an upcoming court case on his own issues, and he was maybe going to be snitching on Tony, and so Tony wanted Bubba, the enforcer, to kill Tim.
So what kind of stuff was Tony alleged to be involved in that was going to be, potentially snitched on?
Tony was a drug dealer and involved in auto theft and moving vehicles across the border into Mexico. There may have been other things too, but those were kind of the two things that we were able to determine throughout the investigation that he was involved in.
Plenty of material to work with, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and plenty of things for Tim to snitch on. Apparently, as we got further into the investigation, we learned that a few years previous to this in another state, Tim apparently had been a snitch and worked with the local cops there to set up somebody on a drug deal. So he had a history of this, and it appeared to Tony that this was about to happen again, and Tony couldn't let that happen.
Sure.
So our detectives, they had Tim's name, and they ran a criminal history check on him and found that Tim was, in fact, a missing person out of the city of Mesa. He had been reported missing about 3 weeks earlier. So this was early October, like October 9th or so. Tim had been missing since September 21st. So that added a lot of validity to what Brian had to say, because Tim really was missing.
And he hadn't shown up, sir. Yeah.
Nobody had seen him. So that kind of started off our investigation. So this all was happening overnight. So the next day when I came into work, there was a meeting held in a conference room, and that's where I was briefed on this information. There was a missing persons detective from Mesa who was in the conference room, and other detectives. And the things that we just now talked about is kind of what was presented during this meeting. Brian had said that the body was dumped near Country Club and the river bottom in North Mesa. So I actually drove out there. It's a big desert river bottom with no water, and looked around. Of course, I didn't find anything. But as the investigation unfolded, within a few days, we actually had the Mesa Police helicopter, the Tempe mounted unit, and I think guys from our bike squad on ATVs were out in the river bottom driving around looking for body parts. And of course, we didn't find him. Ultimately, that's not where Tim was, but that's what we were told. So we needed to find out who Bubba was, and I guess Brian knew Bubba's real name, and so the detectives were able to run him and find that he was currently in custody in Mesa on some unrelated disorderly conduct charges, but that gave us his true name. And through pulling up police reports on Bubba, we were able to learn that his girlfriend was Lisa and where they lived. And that was important because Brian had said during his initial interview with our detectives, Brian had said that Bubba had actually asked him to come to Lisa's apartment and help him get rid of Tim's body, but Brian didn't want to get involved with that. He was pretty evasive, so it was really kind of hard to tell what was legit and what wasn't with Brian, but that was kind of the gist of his story.
Yeah, and I mean, isn't that essentially always the case when you're dealing with these guys anyway? You're never going to get 100% of the truth the first time. There's a lot of vagueness to it. There's a lot of dancing around, and ultimately, as I think is just human nature, you're always going to try to minimize anything that points anything back towards yourself, right?
And you add into the fact that these guys are drug users, meth heads, if you will.
Sure.
It's hard to keep the story straight, and it's actually kind of funny that Tim supposedly was killed for being a snitch, but what's Brian doing right now?
Oh, I got that irony right at the very beginning.
He's being a snitch as well.
Yep.
So we did some follow-up. We learned that Lisa was the girlfriend, and the address was an apartment complex over by Arizona Mills Mall at Priest and Baseline. And some detectives did some follow-up there and learned that Lisa had not been seen in about 3 weeks, which coincided with the time that Tim went missing. So Lisa's from New Mexico, and some detectives had done some follow-up and learned that her kids had been withdrawn from school and that they were potentially re-enrolled in New Mexico. So it appeared that Lisa was out of the picture for a while.
Was there any thought that maybe she was foul play, had anything to do with this Tim guy getting supposedly killed?
There was not really any real concern that maybe Lisa was a victim herself. There was some interest in that maybe she participated in the murder, or at least in getting rid of the body or the cleanup, because that was kind of the vibe we were getting. But we still needed to find Lisa to get it straight from her to find out. So the investigation, there were so many interviews and so many guys, we call it smurfed over from the county jail.
Which means?
So in the county jail at the time, if you're an inmate in jail, you're wearing a blue jumpsuit kind of smock and pants. It identifies you as an unsentenced inmate. And because it was blue and the Smurfs were popular at the time, the terminology of smurfing somebody over was kind of the term of the day. So we had a lot of people that were smurfed over from county jail for interviews at our jail regarding this case. The general story that started emerging, and this was from actually talking to Tim's ex-wife and his girlfriend, who were not smurfed. They were not in custody for anything.
They were not blue.
They were not blue. They were pretty normal in that level of society. The general story was that Tim had been picked up from the Dunkin' Donuts on Country Club in like 8th Avenue in Mesa by Bubba on September 21st, and he had not been seen since.
So Bubba's the last person that is seen with Tim, is what you're telling me here?
Yeah, if you put all the stories together, it appears that Bubba was the last person that could actually be seen with Tim. Like I said, there are a bunch of interviews with these people. Things get convoluted and distorted, and there's a really hard track to follow, so I won't try to take you down that track. Suffice it to say that ultimately I was put in contact with a gal named Annetta, and Annetta kind of was the key to moving this case along. Annetta told me that if you back up...
Yeah, who's Annetta? Like, what's the tie? What's the relationship?
Okay, so Annetta is the girlfriend of... So in this case, there were a lot of boyfriends and girlfriends, and Annetta was the girlfriend of one of the other people whose name I can't recall right now, who was actually smurfed over. And he had given some information that his girlfriend, who went by the name of Lil One, actually had some pertinent information to this case, but he didn't give us Lil One's true name. And it took some more investigation and pulling more police reports on this particular person, and ultimately Lil One, through other reports, was identified as Annetta.
Okay.
And Annetta, we learned, frequented the King's Inn Motel on East Apache Boulevard.
Lovely establishment.
One of the finer places in our fair town, he said with much sarcasm. So I went to the King's Inn to try to contact her. She wasn't there. I talked with the manager. The manager said, yeah, she comes by quite a bit. I'll have her get a hold of you. Ultimately, I did have the opportunity to speak with Annetta, and she told a pretty interesting story. She had told me that back about the time that Tim went missing, that she and Bubba and some others had been at the King's Inn, and they were all doing drugs. And Bubba said that he needed help retrieving something from his apartment and asked Annetta if she and Spider would go with him. So Annetta and Spider went with Bubba, and it was suggested that Annetta be the one to go into the apartment and retrieve this package, which ultimately, I guess, was supposed to be a package of drugs. And Bubba had told Annetta that last time he was at the apartment, he had rigged it so that there was a string going across the front door. So if she were to open the door and the string popped, then he would know that nobody had been in the apartment and everything was just as he had left it. If she opened the door and there was no string, or the string was already broken, then somebody had been to the apartment.
So why doesn't Bubba get his own drugs out of his own apartment?
That's a great question. And I don't know. Why did Bubba rig the door up with a string? Why did he care if anybody... Why would anybody even have a reason to go into that apartment if Bubba and Lisa were just living a normal life in that apartment?
That's the world of drugs, I guess, huh?
That is, it gets better. So Annetta goes in, and she can't find this package of drugs, but she does notice that there's bloodstains on the carpeting. There's areas that look like they've been cleaned up with bleach, and it's kind of a red coloring, but the carpet's all discolored and it's white, so it kind of looked like there'd been some cleanup. She tells Bubba that she can't find whatever it is they were looking for, and so they leave, and they go back to the King's Inn, and they continue with their night of using drugs.
Does she bring this all this other stuff up to him at all about, hey, by the way, it looks like someone got killed in your apartment?
Well, according to Annetta, the general word on the street among all this group of people was that Tim was dead, that Bubba probably did it, but nobody wanted to ask Bubba outright if he was the guy who did it because they didn't want to end up like Tim.
Okay.
So that was their first trip to the apartment that night. Bubba now decides, I need to go back to the apartment and I need Annetta and Spider to go with me again. And this time I'm going to move my stuff out. So they go back to the apartment. Spider stays outside for some reason. And while Annetta and Bubba are in the apartment, Spider freaks out because he thinks he sees police cars everywhere. Turned out there weren't, but he thought there was. And he tells them he's out of here, and he literally flees from the apartment complex and runs off, and that's kind of the end of Spider at that point.
Okay.
He leaves the rest of this story pretty much in Bubba and Annetta's hands. So Annetta goes on to tell me that back in the apartment with Bubba is now picking up blankets and towels and clothing and stuffing them into plastic bags, and she notices, again, the blood stains on the carpet. She said that there were towels and blankets kind of on some stairs that looked like they were covering more blood stains. And Bubba, who never said that he killed Tim, asked her, do you think I'm the one that did this? And she said, I don't know who did this.
Gosh, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to end up like Tim, so I don't know. According to Annetta, Bubba did make some comments like, Tim was a real mess. It made a big mess, but Bubba never said that he was the one who was involved, just that whatever happened to Tim happened in that apartment and it left a mess. Bubba also told her that prior to this time he had tried shampooing the carpeting, but it just didn't work and it just made things worse. While they're there, he packed up his clothes, stuffed them into baggies, and then they ultimately left.
Packed up his clothes, being Tim's clothes.
Packed
or his
up,
own clothes.
Packed up his own clothes.
So he was like trying to abandon the apartment?
He was abandoning the apartment.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. When they went there to get the drugs and the drugs weren't there, I guess that was enough for him to decide maybe it was time to move. So yes, they went back to get his own stuff and maybe clean up some of the blankets and stuff that had been used in whatever had happened in the apartment. So now all the stuff's in garbage bags, and some of the garbage bags got tossed into a pickup truck that Spider was driving but had left when he ran from the
Right.
when he ran from the apartments.
Poor Spider.
Funny thing is, Spider ran across the street to the Bennigans and hid the keys in the men's restroom in the towel dispenser, which we found the keys later. I don't know what Spider was thinking, but
Was this some sort of a prearranged, panic hiding of the keys?
I think that was completely spontaneous and might have been meth-induced. I'm just not quite sure on that.
Could be. That would make sense.
Yeah. Spider was interviewed later on in this investigation, and he worked at a local oil change facility. So when you go to these places to get your oil changed, just be aware of who that is that might actually be changing your oil.
A vehicle that you drive at 70 miles an hour plus, and something to keep in mind.
Something to keep in mind, and knowing that oil is a pretty important thing to keep in the engine. So hopefully he remembers to put the plug back in. But that's a whole nother story. Back to Bubba and Annetta. The garbage bags that didn't go into the truck went into the trunk of the car that they were driving, and they ended up driving to several places around the Phoenix metro area. And Bubba threw some stuff in some dumpsters, and they ultimately ended up in a South Scottsdale neighborhood. Prior to going into this neighborhood, they stopped at a gas station, and Bubba bought a little bit of gas and had it in 2 cups. And when they went to the South Scottsdale neighborhood, they went into an alley, they went up to a dumpster, and according to Annetta, Bubba took the garbage bags out of the trunk, threw them in the dumpster, poured the cup of gas in, lit the thing on fire, and they drove away.
So now, as far as Annetta knows, these plastic bags only contain like the towels and I guess whatever miscellaneous crap Bubba decided to scoop up into the bags to get rid of. Is that right?
Yeah, she doesn't know. She doesn't know what's in the bags other than it's stuff that Bubba has been grabbing around the apartment. There was no indication that she knew that there were body parts or
Right. I guess that's what
weapons
I'm
or
getting
anything like that. It's just stuff that Bubba was scooping up to get out of the apartment.
Right.
And whatever these bags were was important enough to him that he wanted to burn them.
Right. And are they high at this time as well?
Of course.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify.
I mean, nobody does this stuff sober.
Right. Well, I mean, it does. It helps. Being high does help you to do some of the harder things in life. So.
Well, it eases the pain and it lowers your inhibitions and it makes criminal activity so much easier.
True. All right. So he's burning stuff in the dumpster in Scottsdale.
So he's burning stuff in the dumpster. He gets back in the car and he has a second cup of gasoline and he wants to go back to the apartment now and he wants to torch the apartment.
Oh.
So Annetta, we all have morals and values, and it's just that scale is a sliding on who you are at any given time. Well,
And how high you are.
And how high you are. And well, that was just too much for her. She refused to take him back to the apartment to burn down the apartment. So they did what anybody else would do. They went back to the King's Inn and had some more drugs.
Well, the other thing that kind of makes me laugh about this whole thing, and I don't know if you're describing it the way it was, but so you're saying that he had put the gas in a couple of regular paper cups or a couple of red.
As I recall, there were styrofoam cups, but I think gas might have corroded the styrofoam.
So like maybe a couple of red Solos.
Yeah. I don't know how he was able to. She described the gas station they went to. And I don't know where he got the cups from or how he was able to dispense the gas into the cups or how he even had any money to buy the gas with. But, yeah, 2 drink cups of some sort, one for the dumpster and one for the apartment.
I just find that kind of funny. It reminds me of like those videos or whatever where you see these tweakers or whatever going up to the gas pump and trying to pump the gas into seen plastic bags, actually. People try to put it in plastic bags. So... Hey, a couple red Solos full of gas. What's that for? Hey, what are you doing there?
Like we just said, drugs make criminal activity so much more interesting.
Yeah, they do.
So Annetta's story was compelling to the point that we are now able to get a search warrant for this particular apartment. So that's what we did the following day.
In Bubba's old apartment.
Yeah, it was Lisa's apartment. Everything was in Lisa's name, but Bubba, being the boyfriend, lived in this apartment with Lisa.
And Lisa was his girlfriend?
Lisa was his girlfriend.
Okay.
Lisa, at this point, is unaccounted for. She hasn't been seen in about 3 weeks, which coincides with the time that Tim went missing.
The one we talked about earlier that we thought they went back to New Mexico or something.
Right. She's from New Mexico. She may have registered her kids in school in New Mexico.
Got it.
But nobody really knew where Lisa was. So we served the search warrant in her apartment. And just as Annetta described, there was the broken string, there was the carpet stains, the towels and stuff going up the stairs. As we processed the scene, it wasn't as messy as you might anticipate, but there was some blood found in the drain of the bathtub and some other places. And ultimately, this is further down the road, but ultimately that blood was found to be Tim's blood. The search of the apartment, at least, it showed us that something really serious had happened in this apartment, and probably that's where Tim was probably killed.
Right. So when you're processing stuff like that, John, I mean, obviously, if something's within fairly plain view where you're looking at carpet or you're looking at a wall and you're seeing spatter or pooling or puddling or whatever else. But so how would you find out that there was blood in a drain? I mean, do you guys stick a swab down in there or what do you do?
Yeah, so our crime scene technicians have phenolphthalein with them. And so what they would do is swab the drain and then use the phenolphthalein on the swab. And if it turned, I think it was purple, that was indicative of there being blood in the drain.
Got it.
And then we would take samples from that and do some DNA testing on it later to match it back up to Tim.
Got it.
So we did the search warrant, got whatever evidence was in there. No weapons, nothing along those lines. Mainly just Clorox bottles and a shop vac and bloody stains on the carpeting. The rest of the apartment was really messy and disheveled, much like you would expect to see in a meth head's apartment.
Yeah, when a doper bails out of an apartment.
So the following day, through some really good detective work by other detectives, we actually located Lisa, who was in Tempe at her brother's apartment. Oh. And Lisa agreed to be interviewed, so she came down to the police station and sat down in a room with me. Through my interview with her, she was pretty evasive. A lot of, I don't know, I heard, well, maybe, but she was evasive, she was elusive, and she wouldn't commit to really anything. She kind of thought Tim was dead, but she didn't know for sure. She wasn't there. But as I started to press her on some things that we had learned throughout the investigation, things that we've already talked about here, ultimately she lawyered up and said, "I'm done. I want an attorney." And once that happens, we can't question her any further. So that kind of put the end to that interview, and she was taken back home. About 4 days later, and I don't remember if I reached out to her or she reached out to me, but we reconnected again. And during these past 4 days, Lisa, I mentioned that she's Native American. She'd gone home to the Navajo reservation and had told her family the truth about what had happened, whatever that was. Her mom said, "You need to go talk to the reservation medicine man and confess to him and seek guidance and counsel from him." So that's what she did. She went to Window Rock, Arizona, and met with the medicine man, told him everything that happened, and he suggested to her that she return to Tempe and talk to the police and cooperate and tell the police everything that she knew. And so it was because of that conversation that we were able to reconnect and conduct another interview with her.
This one obviously went a little different.
This one went a lot different. So Lisa had said that prior to Tim going missing, Bubba had told her that Tim was feared to be a snitch within their little circle of friends, and that he was supposed to bring Tim to their apartment for a meeting, with air quotes. Lisa took that to mean that something was going to happen to Tim, and she told Bubba that if you're going to hurt Tim, don't do it in my place, do it somewhere else.
Right. She's taking the compassionate road here.
The compassion displayed by everybody involved here was just overwhelming.
Right. So if you're gonna spill blood and stuff, just don't mess up my place. Take him somewhere else.
Exactly. So a few days later, Bubba actually showed up at the apartment with Tim, and he told Lisa that some guys were coming over, that they were going to have a meeting, and that she needed to take her and her daughter, who was there, that they needed to leave immediately, and he would let her know when it was okay for her to come back. So that's what she did. She left, and she went to her brother's house. A couple hours go by, and she starts wondering, well, kind of tired of being here. I want to go home. So she calls Bubba, and Bubba says, "Yeah, you can come back, but come alone. Don't bring your daughter. Don't bring anybody else, just you." So she goes home. And when she gets there, it's nighttime and the apartment's dark, and she goes in and Bubba's in there and he's just freaking out. He's upset. He's scared. He's just not himself. And he starts telling Lisa that the meeting went bad. Things just went bad. But she didn't really know what that meant. But Bubba's like, "I got to get out of here." So they decided to leave and go to her cousin's house. Because that's what you do after you kill somebody, I guess. You go to your cousin's house.
Or have a meeting, one or the other.
Or have a meeting that went bad. So they go to the cousin's house, but the cousin's not home. So they sat outside and smoked marijuana and then decided to go back to the apartment. So they go back to the apartment, and when Lisa goes in again, and she can see now, because they've turned the lights on, and she can see that there's blood stains and something clearly happened in the apartment, and she asks Bubba, "Where's Tim?" And Bubba points down the hallway towards the bathroom. So Lisa goes in, opens the bathroom door, and there's Tim's dead body on the bathroom floor. So now Lisa knows that Bubba's dead,
no question now.
No question now. Word on the street, or not Bubba, but Tim. Word on the street was that Tim's dead.
Right.
And now she's confirmed that.
did she give an obvious indication of death, or did she have any ideas, or just basically saw the body and that was enough?
She saw the body and that was enough. There was some information circling among the friends that Bubba had actually shot Tim in the back of the head while he was playing video games. But as you'll learn as the story unfolds, that we weren't able to confirm that Tim was shot anywhere.
Okay.
So we didn't at that time know what the cause of death was, and neither did she, other than there's Tim dead on the floor. So Bubba now wants to dispose of Tim's body, and there's a lot of drugs involved right now. There's a lot of drugs involved, and Lisa, who's been threatened by Bubba in the past, is terrified of Bubba now that, especially more so now that Tim's dead on the bathroom floor.
Yeah.
Bubba gets a hacksaw and some box cutters. He forces Lisa to put Tim in the help him put Tim in the bathtub.
Right.
And then they commence to dismembering Tim. According to Lisa, she was told by Bubba that if she didn't help, that she was going to end up just like Tim. So she had a lot of motivation to help, even though she probably didn't really want to. But they cut the body in half. They cut off the head. They cut off the arms. They cut off the feet. And made Tim into sizes that could fit into a box and garbage bags.
Wow. You know, and it makes you wonder, like, so nobody goes to school and learns how to dismember a body. So, you know, you think about these two, I'm assuming meth was the drug of choice. So these two tweakers are looking at this dead guy and thinking, how are we going to do this, right? So then he comes up with the grand idea to use a hacksaw, which is just got to be one of the goriest ways to do it. I mean, I would be thinking, you know, let's go a little quicker, maybe a little messier, but let's go, you know, like Scarface chainsaw kind of thing. But I guess it'd be loud.
Well, you use the tools that you have.
Exactly. So he's got a hacksaw and he's got some box cutters.
And he had an axe also.
Oh, he did?
He had an axe also.
Okay, well, I could see that. Maybe for, you know, some of the larger dimensioned parts, you could use the axe, might be a little quicker. But you just have to, I mean, laugh is not the right word, but it's almost like Fargo-esque where you just see these guys looking at this body like, gosh, what are we going to do with it now? And how do you determine, like, sizing? And how do you determine which pieces to cut off?
Well, I don't know. At what point do you go, hey, let's cut them up? That's a really good idea.
Well, exactly. Yeah, to get to that point to begin with. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's put them in the bathtub, and I'll use the axe, and you use the hacksaw, and we'll just dice him up. But they also ran the water in the bathtub so that the blood would drain down and not make so much of a mess.
Ugh, nasty.
I mean, this stuff really happens. We're not making this up. This is the kind of thing you might see in a movie, but this stuff really happens. So Lisa said that he was cut in half at the waist and his arms were severed. They put the bags in Walmart bags, which, I don't know, maybe that's kind of fitting. And some
Attention
duffel
shoppers.
Bags. I guess Walmart's not going to be a sponsor, are they?
Probably not. But I'm good with that.
Put them in some duffel bags, and they ended up putting them in a box. Lisa said that this process took all night and that it was daylight by the time they were finally finished. They put the box into the trunk of her car. Bubba had his own car, which, as the story unfolds, the car that Bubba had is the payment that he received for killing Tim. Now, this was a bright orange Ford Mustang that was probably worth about $500. So Bubba, it really worked out well for him to kill Tim, to get such a styling car.
Nice. $500.
Yeah. And then he told Lisa that he needed to follow her out, just follow her because they're going to go dispose of the body. So they're in separate cars. And I guess Lisa at any time could have turned off and went to a police station and said, hey, I found Tim. He's in the trunk. But she didn't because she was terrified. So they went out to the Fort McDowell Indian Reservation where the Verde River is. And just kind of west of the casino there, Tim drove to a secluded spot, got out, took the box.
Bubba drove to secluded.
Yeah, Tim wasn't doing much driving at that
Tim's
time.
not doing a lot of driving.
Thank you. Bubba went and retrieved the box from the trunk and essentially pitched the contents and the box under a mesquite bush, and then they got in their car and they left.
You know, again, you look at this stuff as someone who's not using drugs and I guess is in a little different place. But so they don't try to bury anything. They don't try to, I mean, he has the thought to burn some of the rags and things that he used to clean up, but he doesn't think to maybe try to burn this as well. They just basically throw it out on the surface of the dirt for someone to find.
Well, it was secluded and it was under a tree. So, I mean,
I suppose. Okay.
I guess in there, and you go with the tools that you have. He didn't have a shovel. He had an axe and a hacksaw.
You're right.
So.
You can't dig real well with an axe or hook. And you have to think, too, I guess on a more serious note, so you're responsible for killing this guy. You dismember him, chop him up, you know, all that kind of nasty goriness that goes along with it, and you transport it somewhere. I think at that point you're so ready to just put distance between you and this piece of dead bodies, you know, or pieces of dead body. That's got to play into it too, that you don't even have the wherewithal to think, gosh, maybe I should hide it or burn it or bury it or whatever. They're probably just thinking, get me away from this nastiness.
Right.
You know,
once this is out in the desert, I'm relieved of any responsibility for it. Nobody's going to know that these body parts are Tim,
right,
and tie Tim back to me.
Right.
So yeah, once it's disposed of, we're free and clear and and on our way.
And let's go get high.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was not long after that. So I had mentioned that Bubba was in custody already on unrelated charges. He had actually been outside the Mesa Police Department in the middle of the night, yelling and screaming and taunting a couple of officers that were out there. And so when they went to contact him, I guess his actions were enough that constituted disorderly conduct, and they hooked him up and booked him into jail for disorderly conduct. So,
which is always a good idea too, if you're a homicide suspect, to go to any police station and draw attention to yourself by screaming and yelling at the cops. That's always a good thing to do after that.
Well, and it's even better when blood from the scene is found on your shirt.
Also, you wear the shirt there also.
You're still wearing the shirt.
Oh, then even better. Yes, even better.
I mean, it might take 4 or 5 weeks for that shirt to be seized, impounded, and processed for evidence, but the blood's still there.
Right.
So,
unbelievable.
Yeah, that's what I would do. If I killed somebody and chopped them up and dumped them in the desert, I would then go to the police station and taunt the cops that are standing around outside.
Makes perfect sense.
So anyway, back to Lisa and her story. Lisa was very cooperative from that point, and she agreed to take me out and show me exactly where they had dumped the body. So I put her in my car, and another detective and I drove out to the Verde River and down a little path and back to a secluded area. And
so at this point, John, are you thinking that you're feeling pretty good about her version of events? Like, are you thinking, we're probably going to find body parts, or are you thinking, I don't think this is going to pan out? I mean, did you have any inkling one way or the other?
I was confident that she was telling what she believed to be the truth, because she had said that there was so much drugs used during this time frame. Her recollection may not have been accurate. I didn't feel like she was trying to mislead me. She just may have had a belief in her head that wasn't accurate.
Sure.
But we went with it. We went out there, and just as she said, there was a box with some blankets and stuff. It was an apple box, and she'd even said it was an apple box under a tree. Well, it had been, a month now that the body had been out there, and this was a desert area and wild animals, so there was animal activity. The bones had been scattered around a bit, There wasn't any flesh or anything left. It was just skeletal remains at this point. But there they were. So we secured that scene, and over the course of the next 2 days did a very exhaustive search and recovered a lot of different skeletal remains, pieces and parts and bones and
so at this point, too, you're not able to identify this as anybody. I mean, because these are just basically bones that I'm sure you could tell these are from a human being, but it's not like you got a name tag hanging off of something.
Right. The interesting thing about Tim, he was probably, I don't remember how old he was, maybe late 30s, early 40s, but he had 2 hip replacements. So we knew that if his body was ever found, that there would be 2 artificial hip joints.
Oh.
And we also had access to x-rays from those surgeries to be able to compare to whatever was found, if anything ever was found.
Got it.
Now, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the TV show Bones or not, but in that, the story is she's a forensic anthropologist, and whenever they have the body, they bring it back to the lab, and it's always just the bones, and she lays the bones out in a fashion as if it were the body laying there. And that's exactly what our forensic anthropologist did with the bones that we recovered, and laid them out. We didn't have a head, we didn't have hands, we didn't have feet, but we had a backbone, we had some ribs, we had a pelvis, we had hips with 2 artificial joints in them.
Wow.
And the medical examiner was able to compare the x-rays, the known x-rays of Tim's surgically repaired hips, to what we had physically there on the table, and was able to make a positive identification that these were in fact Tim's skeletal remains.
And if I recall right too, I believe, don't they actually have some serial numbers that are stamped into some of this stuff too, that you can trace that back to the surgical process of the day or whatever?
They generally do, and honestly, I don't remember if Tim's did or did not. I know that the medical examiner made the identification through the use of x-rays.
Got it. Interesting. So they ID Tim because the hips don't lie.
Because the hips don't lie.
They ID Tim. And so where did things go from there?
Well, so based on all this information now, and Bubba still being in custody, I went to interview Bubba in the jail, and we had obtained a court order to be able to get a saliva sample and some hair samples for DNA purposes to be able to compare to things found at the scene. So when I went to talk to Bubba, he invoked his rights. He chose not to speak about the case. He wanted an attorney present. But we had the court order for his samples, and he was very cooperative and allowed us to swab his mouth and pluck 15 hairs from various parts of his head. And although he never answered any questions regarding the case, the thing about Bubba that has always stuck with me was, if you were to take the concept of evil, pure evil, and personify it into the form of a person, that's what Bubba was sitting in that room with me. His dark eyes, lifeless eyes, soulless eyes, he personified everything that was evil in this world. And it was really weird. But the other more weird part, I guess, is that he was well-spoken, he was polite, he was cooperative, and even pleasant. So the dichotomy of the feeling that came from him and the things that he had done versus his mannerisms was, it still baffles me today.
Well, obviously for you to remember, you know what it almost reminds me of a little bit too is, I don't know how familiar you were, but remember Ted Bundy?
Yes.
Remember how that guy just came off and every single person was like, there's no way it's this guy. But, when the truth was told, the guy was horrific. He was terrible.
Right.
And then, I think part of the definition of being a psychopath is being able to function as if you are a normal person, but you truly, like you're saying, the guy's he's evil. He has no empathy. He has no emotion. It's just, it is what it is,
Well, and I not to go too far off off path, but I think a lot of times, and I believe it in today's world, that which is evil appears good, and that which is good appears evil. And I think Bubba kind of personified that concept.
That's interesting. And I agree with you. And it also, I think it rings even truer to me that the guy, he must have been a pretty bad person, because it's not like that's the one of 3 homicide suspects that you ever spoke with. You know, I mean, for you to say that about this one guy
Right.
out of hundreds.
Well, not hundreds, but a handful.
Okay, a number, not your average cop that might speak to like 2 or 3 in their career.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at my nearly 27 years, I mean, whether homicide or not, I spoke with a lot of people, and nobody struck me as the personification of evil himself,
Right.
like Bubba did.
Yeah, so he obviously stood out and made the impression. Yeah. So where's old Bubba now?
Bubba is serving life in prison. He's currently in Florence, in the prison there. He has not been behaving himself. He's got a long history of disciplinary actions against him in prison, and he went to prison he was arrested in 2001, and he's been there ever since, and he will live out the remainder of his days there.
As he should.
Yes.
Interesting. So what happened to Lisa?
As I remember, Lisa wasn't prosecuted. She clearly was coerced. Well, she wasn't there for the murder. She clearly was coerced into assisting in the dismemberment and dispersal of the body, and she became a very cooperative witness. And so, as I recall, she was not charged with anything.
How about, was it Annette?
Annetta?
Annetta.
I have no idea whatever became of her. The only other person that played a role in all of this that there's any kind of follow-up on is Tony himself. Tony was the ringleader. There was information that Tony might have been involved in the Mexican mafia. I don't know. A lot of people talked. A lot of people puffed themselves up to be things that they're not, especially in this environment of circle of friends. So yeah. I don't know if Tony was in the Mexican mafia or not, but I do know that Tony had lots of different aliases that he went by. In fact, Tony's not even his real name. Ultimately, his name was determined to be Hector, but I always knew him as Tony, and throughout this case, he was Tony.
Sure.
And Tony, like we said earlier, Tony was involved in drugs, auto theft, chop shops, that kind of stuff. Never could get enough on Tony to charge him in this case. Never found the car that he allegedly paid Bubba with, the orange Mustang. But if you fast forward a couple of years, I don't remember the exact time frame, but it had to have been a year or two, Tony actually did get arrested on unrelated charges in Mesa, and somehow or other I caught wind of that. I don't remember how I was notified that this guy was in custody, but he was. So I had the opportunity to sit down with him and interview him regarding this case. Now, he was in custody on other charges, and I didn't have enough to charge him going into this interview on my case, but he was definitely a loose end and one that had been a pain in my neck for the last couple of years because he had too many aliases and didn't know exactly what his involvement was. Mm-hmm. Well, during the interview, it went on for a little while, not terribly long, maybe a couple hours total. But by the end of the interview, Tony, the Mexican mafia ringleader of this band of thugs who ordered the hit on Tim, literally was curled up in the fetal position on the floor of the interview room, sobbing as he was confessing to me that he had actually paid Bubba to kill Tim because he thought Tim was a snitch.
Wow. So in this situation, I don't know that if I was Mexican Mafia, I'd be real proud of that description of this guy being the Mexican Mafia, but here nor there. So at that point with that admission, is that something you move forward with any charging on, or how did it go from there?
Tony was going to be in custody for a while. So a supplement was written and it was forwarded to the county attorney's office. I remember talking to the county attorney who handled the homicide case. honestly, it's been 20 years, and I don't recall what happened to Tony from that point on.
Right. Interesting.
I was thrilled that I now had Tony's true identity as Hector and not Tony. I was thrilled that I had the opportunity to sit down with Tony, and I was thrilled that Tony cried like a baby and confessed everything to me. What became of him after that, I don't remember. And
well, he was a loose end.
Didn't matter.
He completed the circle. He tied the knot. He basically finished everything off for you. And whether he's charged here or there, the fact is he admitted his involvement. And so it all kind of made sense to the story. It wasn't like he said something that made you go, holy crap, there's a whole other aspect to this that we're not even aware of.
Right. Or, oh, maybe Bubba didn't do this.
Right. Or did you ever get an impression that Bubba did it with somebody else?
No.
It was always pointed to
It was always
person.
Bubba.
Got it. Yeah, that's a pretty interesting story. I think one, if you didn't catch it in our obvious statements, drugs are bad. Let's not do drugs because they make you do really wacky, crazy stuff.
Yes, they do.
Legalization and all this other stuff is a bunch of crap. And two, it kind of shows you that even the stuff that you see on TV where, one, people are killed for things that are fairly petty or things that haven't even occurred, happens. And also, people do cut bodies up.
They do.
And they do it in a really nasty, gross way. And you think as a normal person that, I suppose if someone used the right persuading...
Coercion?
Yeah, coercion's a good... that's probably a better way to put it. I don't know that someone could persuade me to hack up a body, but coercion in certain circumstances, yeah, I could probably cut a body up, but that's not a normal thing to do.
No, but in Lisa's case, there was a history of violence with Bubba. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of drugs involved. They were not in their right minds. And Bubba flat out told her that if you don't help, this is what's going to happen to you.
Right.
And she believed that he had the means and motive and method to make it happen. One thing that I just was thinking of is during the search warrant at her apartment, we didn't know exactly what happened. But now knowing that Tim was dismembered in that bathroom, I'm really surprised at what a clean job they did. You would expect... I know that they did clean up, and maybe they just were really good at that. During the dismemberment process, Bubba was making some phone calls, and a couple of guys that Lisa didn't know showed up with a shop vac and dropped that off. So apparently that was used in the cleanup process as well. And I remember during the search warrant that we recovered a shop vac. So it was just interesting that you could never clean that up, but they actually did a pretty good job of it.
So it almost sounds like they might have a little help with maybe some techniques or some advice. That's entirely possible. And then that goes back to Tony, and because these guys that showed up with the shop vac were apparently some of Tony's other thugs. And so were they Mexican mafia? Did they have history here? I don't know. It's like calling the cleaner, It's
exactly.
Like Pulp Fiction. You got to call a cleaner.
Yep.
That's crazy. You got anything to add to that sad tale?
I think we have dissected this one pretty well.
Dissected it, and once again, the hips don't lie. All right, guys, with that, I'm going to close this episode of I Barely Got Here. I thank you for listening, and if you like the show, please subscribe and post a review. And you can always ask your friends to give it a listen if you would also. If you have a question or comment, you can always shoot me an email at ibarelygodhere@gmail.com. And you can also follow me and the podcast on Instagram and Facebook. And with that, Sam42
and Tom42,
we are 10-7.